Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis Indiano. Today, Dr. David Sabatini and Dr. Jim Chamberlain from the University of Oklahoma Water Center are here to talk about the water crisis worldwide and what we can do about it. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Dave Sabatini, can you give us a sense of the scope of the worldwide water crisis that we're going to talk about today?
Sure, R.C. It's something we take for granted. We want a glass of water and we go to the faucet. But there are over 800 million people worldwide that don't have access to an improved source of drinking water. And even more people don't have access to necessarily a safe source of drinking water. That leads to some 2 million deaths a year, largely children. A child every 15 seconds dies from the lack of something so basic as a safe drink of water.
So the sense of the plentifulness of safe drinkable water and water for hygiene and all of that, that's an illusion in the Western industrialized world, and it's really not the reality of most of the world. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and some places, for example, Cambodia has plenty of water. They get plenty of rainfall during the year, but the water sources themselves are not safe. The surface water all tends to be tainted by either human or animal wastes, so it's full of bacteria, and in many cases, even their groundwater, which in a lot of places is pure and pristine and drinkable, in their situation has high arsenic levels. So they can't even take for granted water that comes from the ground like we can. So even though in places where there's plentiful water, you'd think that they'd have plenty of good drinking water, there's still a danger in drinking the water.
So I guess you're talking about two problems, very closely related problems. Access to drinkable, good, safe water, but then it sounds like water is really tied to health in a lot of other ways. Hygiene, people need water to stay clean and to be healthy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the act of staying clean and keeping from taking in bacteria and harmful pathogens takes a lot of water. We take it for granted that we can go to the faucet and wash our hands 2 or 3 times and keep them safe. But
there's just no substitute for water. I mean,
there's not.
You can't have some huge supply of Purell or whatever. I mean, you're going to have water.
And you see in these situations where the water is not so readily available, they have to walk. The women and the young girls are walking 1-2 kilometers each way to get a bucket of water. You've seen the pictures with them water on their heads. And I've heard stories of mothers telling their children, this water is too precious. I've had to walk too far. Don't waste it washing your hands. And we know how important that is to safe hygiene, but when the water is so precious, so it's so hard to even get the water, there's hesitancy to use basic sanitation. And speaking of sanitation, just going to the bathroom, something we take for granted in developing countries. People are doing this, they're out in the fields, they're just going out in the fields and defecating. That's
open defecation.
Open defecation, we call it, and that's all they've known throughout their history. And that leads to sanitation and health issues.
Could you go back to the health issues a little bit more? I mean, what are some of the most awful things that we need to know about here, or the most important?
Well, diarrhea is something that we sort of take for granted as a nuisance, but in many countries, especially children under the age of 5, it can be life-threatening. It is life-threatening because it just completely dehydrates the body. So when children take in these bacteria that cause them to have diarrhea, then it's not able to be allayed easily unless you have other good water to substitute to drink.
So there could be something like cholera that causes diarrhea, but it doesn't have to be. Is that what you're saying? Anything that causes diarrhea is going to be life-threatening to a child because they dehydrate so quickly?
Right, that's right. Cholera is a more extreme case, but there are other less extreme cases that still could cause mortality in children, and I guess in older people as well.
And this is a case where misunderstanding can sometimes play in, because you have diarrhea, a lot of fluids going through your bodies, and sometimes people think, well, I'm giving them too much water because it's all going through their body, but that's what you need to keep doing. And so just simply understanding, and what we take for granted, Gatorade. I remember we were in Ethiopia the first time, and my daughter was with me and got sick and wanted Gatorade. Well, you can't fine Gatorade, but what they do have is what they call oral rehydration solution. Just a little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt and water, because you need the fluid and you need the electrolytes and you need a little bit of sugar. And it's not necessarily the diarrhea that kills you, it's the dehydration.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have the health understanding to counteract these.
And why do you need that rehydration fluid? I mean, why wouldn't just water be sufficient at that point?
And actually drinking distilled water is sounds healthy, but we need a little bit of athletes know that you need Gatorade, the electrolytes, you need to replace the electrolytes.
Does your body lock up when it gets dehydrated?
Yeah, your cells actually begin to, without getting too technical, there's osmotic pressures that play in, and so you need some electrolyte in your body.
And I think it may help your body to retain the fluids, doesn't it? The oral rehydration salts help your body retain the fluids as well.
So let me just make sure I'm clear on this. It doesn't have to be a severe disease that a child gets. Just anything that causes diarrhea is going to cause the dehydration, and that's the lethal situation right there, being dehydrated. What about economic problems that might be related to water? I have a feeling that water is the trail through a lot of problems here. Could you talk about the economic side just a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think the most common economic problem is sort of indirect, and that is that it prevents, when children are having diarrhea or being sick, they can't go to school. So it prevents children from getting, and a lot of times it's the girls, prevents them from getting an adequate education, and therefore they're stuck in a cycle of poverty. They can't educate themselves into a profession or away from out of poverty.
And there couldn't be an industrial society with people working if they're not healthy. I mean, there has to be a basic, a base level of health for people to do anything, and that takes effort, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And so we say water for health, health for education, education for development, and ultimately development for peace.
Okay.
So there's the whole continuum there. And water, food, health are all basic elements to that opportunity.
But you pull that water thread of it out and everything else just collapses. How about the social side of water problems and hygiene problems? What can you say there?
Well, there's we've mentioned the gender issues. It's the young girls and the women that are spending hours and hours a day fetching water. We've seen this in Ethiopia, Jim and I were in.
And that's just traditional in some cultures, that the girls are the water fetchers?
That's their job and their task. And so they're not able to go to school, they're not able to engage in other activities, and so that keeps them kind of locked into that role in society. But we find that in cases where women are able to go to school and they get the education, they become important contributors to their communities. They're concerned about the welfare of their children and their families, and become a real important part of the fabric of a community.
Yeah. There's another aspect too, is even though, say, a company comes in and builds a water system, might be a non-governmental organization, a piped water system, it may only be a couple of dollars a month, which doesn't seem like a lot of money, but it tends to separate the rich from the poor, because the poor have such a limited income, they can't even pay for even that little bit of water. So in one community, you'll have a division between the haves and the have-nots. In this case, it's the water, who has the piped water and who doesn't have the piped water.
That's amazing. So the social inequities that are already there get amplified, exacerbated because of water, and then all the strain that's put on the culture. And so social classes move further apart, gender divisions get wider.
Yeah, they get emphasized even more.
So sometimes when water is brought to a community, it will be brought to a school, a common place where it belongs to the community rather than to the individuals. There's also social challenges in that in Cambodia we've learned that they didn't realize it was the water or the sanitation that was causing the illness or the children to die. They thought it was because of taboos or the curses, or in one case a certain bird landed in their yard, and so that was and so again there's the need to understand the local situation and to try and provide water and sanitation in the not assuming that we come in with the answers, but understand how that society works and how does water and sanitation work into that society. And so we bring in not only the technology, we're engineers, but we bring in the anthropologists and the sociologists and the business colleagues and students to see the multifaceted aspects of the challenge
Yeah. One of the interesting things in Cambodia is, we use chlorine a lot to disinfect our water. If they have any notion that there's chlorine in their water, even if you tell them it's for the good, they think it's a poison, because in the past, in their history, people have used poisons in the water to kill people. And so if they have any taste or any notion that there's chlorine in their water, they're going to stay away from it and not drink it. So it's understanding their past, their history too, to be able to bring that.
It's like we opened this box and we just thought it was about water.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're basically saying that it's about the whole culture. Yeah. I can imagine that these problems at a certain level become political problems, I would think.
Yeah.
People are going to fight over access to water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They say that in the future we'll see not conflict necessarily over oil so much. Water will one day be more valuable than oil. And so you very much see that scenario only becoming more important.
Well, I'm almost hesitant to add another problem here. I mean, these are local problems. They're very severe. They kill people. They disrupt the society. But I guess there's also global warming and environmental toxins happening on a global scale, right? Where does that come into the picture?
Well, with climate change, which tends to be exhibited by global warming, as you say, rising temperatures, what it's going to do is exacerbate weather extremes, so that dry places on the planet are going to get drier, wet places are going to get wetter, and especially the poor people, don't have the resiliency to adapt to these changing conditions as easily as we might have in a developed country. So they're not going to be able to learn new farming techniques, for example, that rely more on irrigation when they depended on rain-fed agriculture. Their soil moisture content's going to go down. Even in cases of people that live along the coast who rely on fresh drinking water, say out of an aquifer, as the sea level rises, it's going to bring salinity into that aquifer at a greater level, so it's going to also jeopardize their drinking water source.
So the rising seas in the oceans really are going to ruin otherwise good sources of water.
Yeah, it's not just a physical challenge. I mean, there is that too, that the people have to move away from the rising coastline, but also their sources of water are going to be endangered as well.
What about environmental toxins? You mentioned arsenic earlier. That's people worry about arsenic in the U.S. I've seen it in towns I've lived in, but we're worried about traces. At higher levels, it's pretty nasty, isn't it?
Yeah, you get into toxicity is in the dose or in the concentration. At low levels, arsenic might occur in groundwater, like in central Oklahoma. There's a concern about long-term exposure. Drinking a little bit of that water over the course of a lifetime might increase your risk of getting cancer.
Yeah.
But we see in Cambodia and Bangladesh and other parts where the concentrations are 100 times higher than what we encounter here, that the health effects are much more
drastically deformed bodies, and really terrible.
They show up much quicker and in more severe ways. But these are naturally occurring. They're just in the geology. And it's interesting though, because the people are moving away from the surface water because it has lots of microorganisms, pathogens. You might get cholera or diarrhea, so let's go to the groundwater, not realizing that groundwater had low levels of these naturally occurring compounds, which over a number of years began to evidence health effects.
Yeah.
I hear you guys sounding an alarm with these details and the situation you're describing. I mean, truly is alarming. It seems like there needs to be a global response. I guess, is the UN Millennium Development Goals, would that be the closest to a global response we have? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's was passed approaching the new millennium, year 2000, and there are 8 Millennium Development Goals. One of them, environmental sustainability, specifically targets increasing access to an improved source of water and to sanitation. And the goal was to decrease in half the number of people without access to an improved source of water and without access to adequate sanitation by the year 2015. And so we're now within, this was year 2000, so 15 years. And those have been marching orders. They've given a global mandate to try to raise awareness to the issues. It's a real challenge, though, because these issues are every day, and things that are every day kind of get lost But when you think about a child every 15 seconds, and you know who,
That brings it home.
and when we've seen the faces of these children in these villages
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Ethiopia and Cambodia, and you know, there's no reason that they didn't choose to be born there, and we didn't choose to be born here. Why are they in that situation? I mean, I think we have a global,
Yeah.
we're a global family, and there's really, so we can look at the statistics, and those are important, but we also need to remember those individual
But
children.
the UN doesn't have any enforcement capability. I mean, are countries cooperating with these goals? I mean, are we going to reach the available water for drinking goal where the problem is cut in half by 2015?
Well, we're on track to reach it with the water, the provision of improved water sources by 2015. And so countries are cooperating. They're doing the best they can with their resources.
So they're taking this seriously.
Yes, yes. But the sort of the illusion with that is even though a village has an improved water source and the box can get checked that they have a source, oftentimes they still are drinking dirty water because of the storage that they have in their house, or they lack adequate hygiene,
Right.
and so they're contaminating their own water supply. Even though it's piped to their house, they're still drinking contaminated water. So it's
So better may not be that good, really.
right.
Yeah.
It's a step in the right direction, but there's other issues that need to be dealt with as well.
What about
And even, Marcy, if I could,
Yeah.
that goal of having it still leaves 800 million people, almost 3 times the U.S. population,
yeah.
without even that
Without,
that
Yeah,
level of
improved
water
water
source.
Right.
So that's not getting the job done. That's making progress towards getting the
It
job
was just
done.
a step. How about the hygiene goals of making
Sanitation.
sanitation?
Well, we're farther behind on that.
Is that a harder sell?
It's a harder sell. It's 19 countries, I believe, over half of the rural people still open defecate out in the field, so they have no form of improved sanitation. And India is one of the biggest countries.
60% of open defecation
Yes.
happens in India. Yeah.
That's right.
I was just there in India a couple of months ago, and they announced they wanted to eliminate open defecation. 60%, you're talking 600 million, twice the U.S. population. They're going to try and change their habits in 10 years.
That
Habits
must
that
just
have been
cause a
there.
whole cafeteria of problems, just diseases and just you know, the flavor of the water. I mean, just a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, the biggest thing is behavior change. I mean,
Yeah.
especially in India, because people understandably don't want to go into a latrine that's not well kept, that's not kept clean. They'd rather
Right.
go out behind the tree back in the field, because that's what they've done for generations and generations. And so changing that whole mindset is going to take a long it'd take every bit of 10 years,
Yeah,
if that.
yeah.
And it's interesting to hear some of the reasons for wanting to continue open defecation. That's when it's kind of like tea time for the women. They go out in the fields together and they defecate in the fields, and they talk about their families, and they probably talk about their husbands or whatever they talk
It's
about.
a social time.
And so, you know, we don't think about those things, and that's where it's important for us to have the anthropology, sociology understanding to why are they doing things the way they are, and how can we find a way within the way that they do things to help this make sense for them. Not try and superimpose our logic on them, but understand in their fabric of life, how does this fit in?
What you're saying about understanding the culture seems to be a thread in a lot of things you've said, that we can't just push water where it needs to be. You know, if there's an expensive well and the people haven't bought into it, it hasn't become part of their culture, it doesn't last. I guess that's the sort of point you're making, right?
Yeah, we talk about sustainability as a concept, but when it comes to water, for a water source to be sustainable, there has to be some mechanism for example, that pump to get repaired, or the latrine, in the case of sanitation, to be maintained and to be kept clean so people will use it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we're working on at the Water Center is helping inspire local entrepreneurship, so local business people who
In the country.
in country,
Yeah.
who can maybe start a small business, maybe get a micro loan to start a small business, and provide the mechanism for either replacing the pump, keeping the pump going, or in the case of arsenic or fluoride, to design and sell filters that'll filter out the contaminants.
So you guys came at this problem, and the Water Center came at this problem as an engineering problem to solve, but it's really mushroomed on you, and it's a social anthropological issue. It's really got to be dealt with on that
And also
scale.
a business,
business
economic,
issue.
and so we bring together anthropology, business, and the technology. And we actually have an NGO in Oklahoma City, Water4, that does a nice job of illustrating this. They're trying to mobilize local entrepreneurs to get involved in providing the drilling and the pumps. So it's exciting to have local groups.
Well, and I'm glad we're talking about the University of Oklahoma Water Center, because this is one of the responses, like the UN Millennium Development Goals. This is one of the responses to the crisis, right?
Yes.
Centers around the country, like this one. Could you talk a little bit about this center and how did it start and what does it do?
The Water Center, and water is an acronym, capital W, capital T, capital E, capital R, Water Technologies Emerging Regions, Water and Sanitation for All. And officially we came together in 2006 as a group of faculty that had common interest, learned of the UN Millennium Development Goals, and decided we need to have a university response. Looked around, and there were a few universities doing some things, but we saw an opportunity to really take our skills and our expertise and make a meaningful impact. And so we build on a longer history. We were the Environmental Groundwater Institute, a National Center for Groundwater Research going back several decades. But really in 2006 we determined to shift our focus from U.S. only to the developing countries, picking topics that also have a U.S. connection. Arsenic is an issue in central Oklahoma, it's an issue in developing countries.
So you're a network of information with other centers, and you're helping to provide knowledge about bringing water to places that need it in a way that's going to be effective. Do you actually send teams out to work on water problems?
Yeah, we have really three tiers of work within the Water Center: research, education, and service. And the research component is what you're talking about, where we send teams out to study and to develop technologies within the proper cultural context to mitigate certain particular problems. And some of them deal with climate change. We have researchers doing climate change work on water availability.
That's Dr. Yang Hong.
Dr. Yang Hong. And Dr. Bob Nairn does work on passive treatment wetlands, which is taking a natural system and purifying water that's leaching off of mine drainage in Bolivia. And then Dr. Sabatini does work with fluoride and arsenic mitigation in those impacted areas. But the teams are composed of researchers, and in our case, teams of researchers from anthropology, sociology, business, and technology coming together to look at the bigger picture of the problems.
Now, you also brought a water prize. You give a water prize that you brought into this picture. How does that work?
That's, we're modeling at RC after your Newstat prize that you managed so well, and we have a group of jurors that are experts themselves that each nominate one candidate for the prize, and I have an example of the prize here beside me. This is an original piece of artwork.
The
shape of
trophy
a water
piece of
drop,
artwork.
but
Oh,
it's the
beautiful.
globe. And those jurors, this last time we had 6 jurors, come together and they select the winner of the prize amongst themselves. And as we learned from you, this really helps provide an international stature. Our colleague Randy Kolar helps to implement that approach. And then, so we have that. The prize winner will come this coming September 23rd to 25th, 2013. We'll have the International Water Conference, and we'll have people from 30-some states in the U.S., 30 countries around the world, 6 continents will come together, and we'll have an international conference, and the prize winner will receive the prize and give the plenary talk at our conference. So this is a way of outreach and connecting with others.
And people pay attention to prizes, so this is a way of getting notice of these important issues by having the prize out front, is to sort of attract their attention in a way. Is that right?
We're trying to acknowledge and celebrate the winner of the prize, but also bring visibility to the importance of the work that the prize winner is working on, and then also to help motivate students to this work in the future. And we have students in our classes that we teach. We have a Sooners Without Borders organization kind of an Engineers Without Borders plus. Robert Knox, a colleague, Dr. Knox, supervises, and so it helps to provide an inspiration to these students of the important work.
Who's the most recent prize winner? It's a
woman, Ada Oko Williams, is a worker. You know, she's on the front lines, you might say, in all these issues we've been talking about. She worked for Water and Sanitation for Africa, and it's an African-led, born and led organization mostly located in Western African states that really does marvelous on-the-ground work, working with African nations and their leaders to make water and sanitation changes in mostly, well, rural and urban areas of their countries. So she's our first prize winner that's really a in-the-field practitioner. We've had 2 prizes before Ada, but she'll be coming and giving the address next fall at the conference.
And we're really excited to give her the prize. We're excited for her to visit with our students and that interaction. The students will be very inspired by the important work that she's done.
And there'll be discussions around her getting the prize that will be educational for people.
Yeah,
I mean, and that's really what you want out of that.
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk, in the time we have left, just a little bit more about how to think about water problems. I think what you've told us today is that they're not technological, exclusively engineering problems. It's not availability of water in some global sense. Water is out there. I think you've said that they're cultural problems. Maybe is there an issue of political will in providing water where it's needed? How can we think about this?
You know, there's a lot of competing issues, and there's HIV/AIDS, and actually, just as a little side point, water is critical to addressing the HIV/AIDS issues because it's the people that are struggling with HIV/AIDS that are most susceptible to unsafe water, and so that providing safe water becomes a critical component to addressing the HIV/AIDS issues. But there's all these other issues, political unrest and the like, competing for the interest and the attention of the different governments. And so there is the need to, and often the people we're talking about are out in the remote villages, and so they can be sometimes somewhat forgotten. So we need to raise the awareness, need to motivate the countries, the political will, both in country, but also the political will. Secretary Clinton made a wonderful speech on World Water Day where she highlighted the importance of water to gender equity, to education, to health, and how the not only political outreach, but also development and the peace that can come through these things. And so there is the importance of the political will. There's kind of there's the macro and the micro, and you have to think of each child out in the village, but you also have to think of the big picture and hopefully approach it from both sides. And the winners are the children and the future of the country and global stability.
Well, I think that's where we want to stop. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you both for being on the show today. The show today was brought to you by Video Media Services and the University of Oklahoma College of Engineering. Join us next time for Current Conversations. Thank you for watching.